Hello. Just gonna wait a few seconds, make sure I'm fully live here. I know it's an unusual time that I go live. Wednesday at noon, it's not usually my time. But it just worked this week, and I wanted to talk about food tracking a little more since we have a lot more people in a challenge that I'm running right now, and my clients do a lot of tracking as well. So I thought this was a good thing to go over, some stuff that might be a review for current clients or some things that are brand new to you as a challenger. Or if you're neither, if you're not a client or a challenger and you just want to learn more, that's great too. All right, so I will go and start with number one, why we track food, especially if you are someone pursuing a specific goal when it comes to weight loss, fat loss. So when we look at kind of why are we going to track our food, and specifically what is it going to tell us, and that's exactly why. A lot of times we think we're eating healthy, we think we're eating enough. When you actually put those things into a tracker, then we can look back on it and say, oh, I could actually make some adjustments here, or I had no idea there was this much fat in this particular food or fat in my overall diet. So it really becomes just a data source. So for somebody that's like thinking that they eat healthy, they just can't see results, well, let's see exactly what's going on by tracking your food. And for honestly all of my clients that I bring on board, I have them track for 5 to 7 days straight of anything they eat in general. And then from that point, it tells me their baseline and some areas of kind of where maybe they could use some help. So understanding and becoming aware of what you're eating is super important, especially when you have goals. Now, I will preface this by saying that tracking can get a little obsessive. So depending on your personality, I would say tracking, take it lightly if it is something that becomes, obsessive for you, or it's just like the scale. So I tell people, if you're okay with weighing yourself every single day and it's not going to mess with your head, let's go for it. And same thing with tracking. If you're a person that's like super obsessive about it, you can't go one day without tracking, or you're going out to dinner and it becomes, a problem when you're out to dinner, you have to plug everything in your app, then we might want to slow down and think of some different ways to track your food other than, or just, eyeball and things like that. So that's why we track food, is to become more aware, and it's a tool. So for my people doing the challenge, we have you, I suggest getting linked up to MyFitnessPal or Fitbit, are the two apps that connect right to my app called Trainerize. So those are the two, again, they sync right to my app. For the challenge, we don't necessarily, I'm not looking at the actual foods you're eating. We're simply setting a calorie target, simple calories to stay within for 3 weeks. That's just going to, again, establish more of a baseline for you if you are going to continue on past the challenge with me as your coach. But again, that's just two apps that connect. There are several others out there. If you are not in the challenge, you're just curious, you've never tracked before. A lot of different apps out there. I know there's one called Carb Manager that kind of focuses more on staying lower on the carbs. So those are just some options. MyFitnessPal there's a free version of it. It's the one I use. It's simple. And I do have the premium version, but you don't have to for just general tracking. So once you are, let's say, into MyFitnessPal, basically what you're going to do is input all of your food. And how you do that is either through a barcode. If your food you're eating has a barcode, simply scan it right in and make sure that the serving matches to what you're eating. And then that's how you track. It becomes a little trickier, and I'm going to go through some tips here in just a second, but tracking becomes a little trickier when we have recipes involved, where you're not quite sure of every single amount of things and things like that. But I'm going to talk about some tips with that in just a second here. For the purposes of the challenge, like I said, we're just trying to track your calories, but being accurate is important. And I always tell people it's never going to be perfect. So, when I start people off and I actually break down, you're going to get, for my clients, they get calories and macros. So they're trying to hit, number one, making sure they hit their overall calorie target, but making sure that their protein, fats, and carbs stay in a good ratio of what the numbers I gave them. That can get really tricky. So I tell people to do the best you can with it. Every day is going to be a little different, unless we're eating the same foods every single day, day in and day out, which I do not recommend. That can get quite boring. So, and it's better for us to have a variety of foods just in general for digestion and health purposes, getting a lot of your other micronutrients inside of your macronutrients. So just some tips when it comes to food tracking. Once you start entering your foods, you'll get into a rhythm. A lot of the foods that you eat, I have a lot of staple foods that I eat daily. So a lot of my proteins I like to eat pretty much the same daily, and then I'll change up some of the other, carbs and fats as I go. But they can be kind of transferred over from the day before. So it's kind of like a little trick that if you have the same meal, you can save it in MyFitnessPal, and then that's your breakfast for the next day. You just plug it in like that. So that's one thing for some of your meals. You can kind of create a meal and put it into MyFitnessPal, and then that becomes a little bit easier, taking a little less time off your hands there. But some kind of mistakes or kind of tips to look out for when you start tracking food. And like I said, we want to be as accurate as possible, but also know this isn't a perfect science. You are going to have little errors here and there, just human error, plugging it into the app error, and measuring errors. I'm going to talk about that in just a second too. So the first thing is eyeballing versus measuring, and actually weighing your food. If you have never weighed your food at all, I would suggest getting a food scale. They're super cheap. You can just buy one to have on your kitchen counter and play around with it. So, like I said, a lot of times we can eyeball our food and we think we're eating 4 ounces of chicken, put it on that scale, and you're like, oh, that's only 3 ounces of chicken. That's a big deal. When you are trying to hit macros and calories, those little ounces here and there can really add up throughout the day. So again, not trying to get super obsessive, but just use it as a learning tool. So the next time you go to have your 4 ounces of chicken, you can say, okay, this looks a lot better. I think, this is the right amount. So that's the first thing, is eyeballing versus measuring. And at some point, we are not going to be tracking our food and weighing and measuring all the time. I simply like to say this and stress this when you are actively pursuing a goal. So that's when we're really involved in weighing, measuring, all of that stuff, entering it into your app. But we want to get you to a point where you can do this without. It's just more intuitive. You can eyeball and you have a general sense of how much food you're taking in and how much you need. But again, if you're pursuing that goal, we want to make sure we are being accurate. The other thing here now is something called BLTs, bites, licks, and tastes. So let's be honest, when you're cooking your meals at home or you're just kind of milling around the house, how often do you just take a little bite of something or a taste of something off of the spoon that you're cooking? Those actually add up too. So a lot of times it's easy to overlook those and we bypass it. We don't put it in our app. But if you are someone that mindlessly does that over and over again, it could come to maybe 100 to 500 calories before you know it. And that can really mess up your whole equation. So that's one thing, is those bites, licks, tastes of things as you're going around the house. Then we want to focus on, let's see here. Oh, another good tip is to track before you eat it. So if you're not sure what foods are even consisting of, but you're like blindly eating things, and then you put it in the app, you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it had that much calories in it. That's okay. But if you're getting better at this type of thing, then you can start to put your foods in beforehand. So especially if you have a recipe that you're gonna make for the next day, put it right in your app and see not only what's in there, but how much of it should I be having based on the rest of my day. A lot of times I get this a ton from my clients, is where I get a text at like 8 o'clock at night and they're like, I still have like 40 grams of protein to eat and 35 grams of carbs. What should I eat? So in a case like that, it's just one day. Let's start over tomorrow, or maybe have a bite to eat, but we don't want to be stuffing our face, before bed. So that would be one way to tackle that, is be proactive, put your food in your app for the next day and see, where that lines up as far as your calories, as far as your macros, if you're tracking your macros, and then you can plan accordingly. And it might not go perfectly that next day, but at least you have a frame, you have an idea of what you're going to be eating, and you have it all ready. The more planned you are, the better you are to stick at it. And the next tip we have was to be consistent with your measurements. This one I get a lot too, is how to put it into the app or measure it. Should you measure it cooked or raw? Basically cooked or raw. So honestly, there is some debate on that. I get a lot of the research that I've done says the more accurate it is, you want to do it when it's raw. But I would say just stay consistent with it. So if you are a person that measures after your meat is cooked, I don't really like to play with raw meat. So I will do mine cooked and just try to stay consistent with that. So every time I measure my meat, it is cooked, and that's what I eat. And I just stick to that. Another trick is to, when you're entering in your serving sizes into your app, is to try to go as much as you can into grams and ounces. So even especially, you've probably seen this at the store, a difference in the size of a banana even. Some of those bananas now are freaking huge. So think about that in terms of grams. If you were to put that on a food scale next to a smaller banana, how many more carbs are you actually eating with that larger banana? So that can really add up too if you're somebody that eats a banana every day. Again, I'm not saying to measure your banana every single day, but if you're like, that looks really big, I might want to eat just half of that today. But that stuff does add up too. And the next one is, of course, our liquid calories. We have to track those as well, including alcohol. So even though alcohol is kind of its own separate category when it comes to nutrition, it does still have calories. And so that's what we want to make sure that we're tracking. We're making sure we're aware of how many calories extra we're going over if we are going to plan a night out, have some cocktails, that kind of thing. That's the beauty of tracking everything, is that you can fit it in. So maybe I'm gonna cut back a little bit on the carbs that day because I know I'm gonna have a few beers at night. And so you can just, again, be proactive about your drinking. And then finally, for you guys, especially in the challenge right now and new to this tracking, we are going to ignore, if you're somebody that pops into MyFitnessPal and it puts in, or it asks you how much you work out, we're ignoring that section. So sometimes it'll subtract 500 calories because it says you work out every day. We want to ignore that, and we want you to still, whatever target we gave you for the challenge, you want to hit that no matter what. So just disregard that exercise caloric amount. It's not there for a reason. Sometimes people use it, but it kind of plays with the mind and thinking that you have 500 extra calories that you can eat because you worked out. So the numbers I give you already have your activity level included into the calculation. So it's a common question I get is, MyFitnessPal it's telling me to eat 500 calories more because I worked out today. Nope, stay with the number I gave you and we'll just disregard that exercise number. And the other thing with MyFitnessPal, if you're wondering, it will automatically set up targets for you just based on the stats that you put in. And if I've given you a different number than what MyFitnessPal says, you can go into your settings and change that, just a settings thing. So you'd want to pop in there and put the number I gave you. So a lot of times, for whatever reason, it comes up with 1,200 calories when I'm telling you to eat 1,500. That can throw things off too. So make sure that you do change that over in MyFitnessPal as well. So I hope that helps as far as tracking goes. And if you have any questions specifically, let me know. For the people in the challenge or my clients or anybody, I'd be happy to answer. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday. We'll see you soon.